Hi everyone, thank you for coming to the most exciting talk of the day, procurement. See, I said that with a straight face. So what we might do, I'm just conscious of time. What I'm going to do today is essentially run you through a greatest hits of procuring cloud and how to achieve your business outcomes with AWS. What I'll do is I'll move quite quickly through all the content, but if you have questions, what we'll do is we'll take those offline. I'll hang around outside at the end if you want to come and have a chat to me. So, there we go. So here's our agenda for today. So we're really going to talk about what cloud is and how it differs, common pitfalls that people run into when they're doing their cloud procurements and how you all can avoid those. What makes for a successful cloud procurement, and then 5 tips for how to do that. So let's go. So what is the cloud and how does it differ? So in the same way that technical people sometimes have to look at cloud computing and go, okay, well, I'm very used to doing things on an on-prem environment. Need to maybe rethink some of the things that I'm doing here. Cloud computing procurement is much the same. It requires a little bit of rethinking sometimes on behalf of procurement teams. So let's just have a quick look at what is cloud computing. This definition is really important, I guess, to understand in terms of the context of on-demand and self-service and all the things that make the AWS cloud what it is today. After the first couple of times of giving this talk, I had one of my government customers say, well, that's all well and good, but maybe what you should do is juxtapose that against what traditional government procurement looks like, because we really need to understand why it's different. And, my customer basically said, well, this is what, all procurement people are used to today. And that's why cloud is different. And so, to understand what you're trying to get out of using the AWS cloud, whether you are someone who works in the business of your agency, or you are a procurement person yourself, or you work in another role that's related to procurement somehow, these are the clear benefits of using the AWS cloud. So these are the reasons why you would use the AWS cloud. And it's really important to get the cloud procurement right, because if you don't, what can happen is the benefits that we just saw, those can be eroded to the point where the actual reason to go to the AWS cloud may not exist if you don't get the procurement done properly. And so the key thing that we need to look at when it comes to the erosion of those responsibilities and what that all means is really, what happens when government agencies start looking at buying cloud. They might have maybe done, a little bit of cloud before, or looking at using AWS for the first time, and we're going to buy some AWS cloud. And it's really starting to understand who actually does what in terms of responsibilities. And so, on the left-hand side there, you can see, cloud service providers, there's AWS, and the things that AWS does in terms of services. And on the right here, you can see the rest of the cloud ecosystem and what they do. So what, partners do and what public sector customers do and are responsible for. And that can be quite different to a traditional ICT procurement, where procurement people are used to saying, we're going to go out, we're going to find a vendor, and they're just responsible for everything. And that's where, procurement people and business requirements can run into a little bit of problems. And so, with the AWS cloud, there's this shared responsibility model. And I talk to procurement people, risk people, legal teams, a lot about this to help them to understand what that all means when you're actually buying the AWS cloud. So in this shared responsibility model, customers are responsible for security in the cloud. So basically, everything that a customer does, the data, the applications, everything that's in the control of the customer is their responsibility. And then AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. So essentially, the infrastructure, the global infrastructure layer, and all of the things that, the compute and the storage that the customer will consume. And so that, understanding those two things, the ecosystem, who's responsible for what, and the shared responsibility model, are really critical when it comes to the idea of starting to approach the market and write requirements for how you'd like to procure cloud. And so the delivery model is different as well, because when government procures IT, typically in a traditional model, it's kind of like, here's all the things we want and you'll just give us all that wrapped up in a bow, right? But with the self-service model, it essentially means that the government agency is selecting what they want to do, and sometimes that can change. We saw the funny definition of what government ICT procurement looks like. Those requirements change over time, and it's possible one of the benefits of the AWS cloud is being able to do that. So, it's really important to keep that in mind. What I thought I'd show you are some actual real-world examples. These are taken from tenders that have gone out to market. Real-world examples of what not to do as a government agency when you're looking at procuring cloud. So the first one we've been talking about already, which is about apportioning responsibility. And this is basically word for word from the tender. The customer appoints the supplier to provide, take your pick, deliverables, change management, whatever it is, transition in, transition out. Again, going back to that utility model that we looked at, where the division of the responsibilities from a cloud service provider and partners, you can see clearly that AWS as a cloud provider, doesn't do those things, right? And so with the services, for example, compute, as a customer, you have complete control over the deliverables, the acceptance testing, all of those things, because they sit in the side of the responsibility model that the customer looks after, that is, the customer's in control of. So, for AWS services like EC2 for compute or storage like S3, the customer can do all those things themselves. Another good example is reporting requirements. So agencies might write into their tenders, or have in the past, the supplier will do this, send us reports or email us things or give us these things on a regular basis. But AWS has mechanisms within the management console that as a customer, you can do all of these things yourself. So there's no need, again, it's a pull model, not a push model. You're self-serving, so you can do all of these things without having to write it in as a deliverable into the actual, tender or into the requirements, because that's under your control. And another one that trips, a lot of customers up is things like access and audit rights, saying, we want to be able to come to the supplier's premises and get a tour of the data center, or one we've seen before that happens a bit, the cables in the data center must be blue, right? That sort of thing. So, these things, again, can trip up procurement people because, sometimes they just go copy and paste from a traditional IT procurement, and that's not something that, when AWS is working with you, will be able to meet when it comes to, a requirement that a customer's asking for. So those are kind of, examples of some of the things not to do. So what are the things that, we should do, or what we should look for when it comes to a successful cloud procurement? So there's actually two key components that I talk to my government customers about. The first one is to actually successfully procure the cloud is their approach to market. And the second one is selecting a contract type. Now, for some procurement people, they'd be like, okay, that's like, yeah, you're stating the obvious there. But you'd be really surprised by how many procurement people that I speak to who are used to doing a traditional ICT procurement where these things have become very intermingled, and it's not really clear how to make that approach. So what I'm going to do to you now is talk about how to navigate those two things and actually achieve that outcome successfully. So when we're talking about an approach to market for cloud, there's really three main ways that my customers talk to me about and I talk to them about. The first one is sole source. Some customers have been using AWS for a while. They're like, yep, we've done up our plan internally. We've got sign off from the delegate. We know that, you meet our requirements. We're going to do that. Okay, sure. The second way is to do a market test. So actually doing the manual process of going out, and as an agency, you'd have processes or a shared processes amongst a portfolio of agencies maybe about how you would do that market test. Again, all internal stuff. The third way, though, which I really wanted to talk to you about today, is the idea of using a panel. So lots of government agencies prefer to buy through a panel, whether it's traditional IT or any other sort of procurement. But what I wanted to talk to you about specifically today was the Cloud Services Panel with the DTA, the Digital Transformation Agency. So, just out of interest, a bit of a hands up, who in the room is from Commonwealth Government, federal government? Okay, a few. And state government? Yeah, also quite a few. And then local government, a couple of local government. So the Cloud Services Panel is a really interesting one. For those of you who don't know, it's a procurement panel that the Digital Transformation Agency here in the Commonwealth Government has set up, and it has 180 plus vendors on it across a range of categories to do with cloud. So there's professional services, and there's public cloud, which AWS participates in. And so, the idea of the Cloud Services Panel is essentially that you as a government agency can sign into a portal that they've built and get access to a very much simplified procurement path specifically for cloud. So you can actually go into the portal, you can choose one or more vendors that you'd like to get quotes from, and you can choose the services that you're interested from those vendors, so whether it's compute or storage or AI, ML, whatever you're interested in procuring, and you can put your requirements into there, your procurement requirements, and then the participating vendors, AWS included, get workflowed essentially a mechanism to respond to your requirements, and it really reduces the time and the effort that procurement people have to go through to actually procure cloud. So a lot of these other things that we've talked about, the hassles and, doing the manual kind of procurement mechanisms, those kind of go away if you use the Cloud Services Panel. And the DTA have put an incredible amount of time and effort into making it really straightforward for government agencies to procure cloud. So I'd highly recommend that if you don't already have established processes internally for procuring cloud, it's a really good idea to go and have a chat to them about using the CSP as your mechanism for approaching to market. And why that is even extra handy, I will talk a little bit about in the coming slides. So, so we talked about the first thing we need, which is the approach to market. And the second thing is you need a contract, right? What's the terms and conditions that you're actually going to use the cloud under with AWS, okay? So there's a couple of different ways of doing that. The first one is a direct contract. So if you go online right now and you sign up for an AWS account, you'll have what's called the customer agreement. There's an online set of terms and conditions. You can go and look at them. It's not a secret like anything else AWS does. It's listed right there on the website. You can read all those terms and conditions. We have plenty of government customers who today are just happy with that customer agreement that they used, that they signed up for when they created their account. However, there is now, you may have heard the recent announcement, there's this thing called the Whole of Government Agreement with the DTA, which essentially is a fancier set of terms and conditions that were designed specifically for government. And the feedback that we've had is, that really helps government agencies to mitigate the risk, perceived or otherwise, that they have when they're looking at procuring cloud. And so there's an option now to work with the DTA around getting a fancier set of terms and conditions for your contract that's basically been pre-negotiated and pre-approved for all types of government. So that agreement is available for Commonwealth government agencies, state, local and public universities as well. So it's definitely worth having a chat to the DTA. Now the reason why I say that is the Whole of Government Agreement, where you get those terms and conditions, was actually designed specifically to interlock with the Cloud Services Panel as the procurement mechanism. So what you can actually do is get an end-to-end experience with the DTA, working with another government agency as the ICT procurement experts within Commonwealth Government, and essentially you can, through a portal, go and do your procurement with a set of vendors that have been approved onto the panel, and once you've done that procurement component and selected AWS as your successful vendor, the terms and the conditions for your contract of using cloud actually roll in to your usage of the Cloud Services Panel. So it's well worth having a chat to the DTA. So with direct, that's kind of the scope. You have a direct agreement with AWS in one of those circumstances. With the indirect model, you're essentially working with a partner. So we don't have time to go today to dive into all the different permutations and combinations, but essentially the idea is that you have a set of terms and conditions that you work with a partner to actually consume cloud, AWS with. And the third way, which sometimes complicates things and creates a little bit of confusion, is some procurement panels have a set of terms and conditions built into them that are also available for consuming cloud under. So those I guess are the options, and being able to understand, I have to go and do my approach to market to actually select a vendor successfully in my procurement, and then I need some terms and conditions, i.e. my contract, to consume AWS cloud services under. So those are the two key things that you're going to need for a successful procurement. So the other thing to understand, just as a side note, is what are the legislative and compliance requirements that your agency has when you're buying cloud. So just keep those in mind as well, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in the tips which are coming up. So we've got these 5 tips now for a successful cloud procurement. So the first one, I know again, this might be a little bit stating the obvious if we've got any procurement people here, but going back to the examples I was giving you before of what not to do, being able to start with the business driver and talk about what you're actually trying to achieve for your business outcome is really, really important when you're buying cloud, even more so than a traditional ICT procurement. The next thing is get your governance teams involved sooner rather than later. So procurement, legal, security. If this is the first time that you're buying cloud, or it's your first significant workload in the cloud, it's really important for those key stakeholders to understand what you're trying to achieve. The next one is the 2 things that we just talked about, understanding the vehicle, the procurement vehicle and the contract. What does it give you? How does it work? Ticking all the right boxes and making sure you understand all of that. And focusing your requirements on capabilities. So what is it that you actually want to do? Instead of, saying, here's these things that we need you as a cloud provider to do, instead figure out, instead of prescribing those requirements, figure out what does it look like? What's the actual, problem that we're solving doing that? And like we talked about before, correctly apportioning responsibility, making sure that when you put your requirements together, that things that you're writing in for a cloud provider are actually things that a cloud provider can do, as opposed to another part of the cloud ecosystem that we saw before. So where to from here? Work through the tips that we've talked about today. We've got a white paper online that you can just search for called 10 Considerations for a Cloud Procurement. It's really great. And last but not least, talking about those governance teams, if this is the first time that you're doing it, or there needs to be a bit of education in your agency, I'd highly recommend they go and do AWS Technical Essentials. Really, it's an AWS 101, just to understand what is the cloud. How do we use it? What's the difference between what we've got now and what we'd be doing in the future? I've had procurement people before when I've done like an AWS 101 with them and actually talk them through what it means to consume AWS cloud services. They've just in the middle of the meeting stopped and gone, why don't we buy all our IT this way? And I've kind of looked at them and gone, yeah. So it's really important for all of those supporting functions to understand what it means to use the cloud as well. So if you've got any questions, come and see me afterwards. Thank you all very much. And my email address is just there if you'd like to contact me with any questions. Thank you.